Howdy, like the light art here. Listen, have you ever wanted to make a game? Well, like many pathetic little nerds, I grew up wanting to be a game developer. A big part of why I started writing and drawing in the first place was to help me make games eventually. So naturally, I've made a few games in the past. Then, recently, I got bored and I wanted to change a pace, so I made a video game in a month. Here, come on, I'll show you my stuff. Anyone who's made a video game will tell you that making a video game is extremely difficult. A grueling process that almost always takes longer than intended. Luckily, this is not my first time making a game. You see, I took a 4-semester programming course in high school. We used this super outdated language called Blitz Basic, and with it, I crafted 4 amazing games. Let's take a peek at them before we look at how I made my new game, just so we have an idea as to what level of experience I have, and to pad out the video's runtime. The first game I made was a blast backwards, the most riveting shoot-'em-up of 2017. A demon named Fabio stole your legs, so you crawl extremely slowly, but you get blasted backwards whenever you fire your gun. There are 4 enemy types as well, the amazing wall-crawling robots that fire at you, little tanks that run you over, tanks that split into smaller tanks, and slow-moving bombs that explode when they get near you. There are also upgraded versions of these with better stats. The only actual goal is to beat Wave 10, but the game is such a horrifically unfair mess. I mean, the whole game is so rewardingly challenging that I've never managed it myself. I'm pretty sure it's possible, but I mean, for all I know, there's some bug that prevents you from winning. I wouldn't know since that would require getting there first. Also, you can only fire your gun once your bullet hits something. In other words, your fire rate is completely dependent on how close you are to your target. Everything is set on a grid as well, and both kind of make it a pain in the ass to play. Okay, so I admit it, it was pretty shit. But that's fine. I mean, I made a few of these, so one of them has to be good, right? Next semester, I made 2 games. The first was Epic Math Man, a work of art depicting how improper education often leads to a life in and out of jail. Solve math problems to escape the cops. The longer you survive, the more points you get. Is it good though? I mean, it's a math game. It's one of the better ones for my class, but not something I would imagine someone wants to play. The third game I made was Spider Dance, the first game with assets entirely made by me. You play as Betsy the Drider, who appeared in my last video. She's been trapped in some sort of strange pit, and these weird green monsters are spitting fireballs at her. Dodge the fireballs for as long as you can to get a high score. The issue is that dodging the fireballs gets boring pretty quickly. Also, you're just large and slow, so it feels clunky and bad. Okay, one last game. I learned a lot from the last 3, so this one has got to be amazing. For my magnum opus of Blitz Basic, I made a platformer where you have to complete the level in a certain amount of time. Frostbite's controls feel pretty horrible, but it's almost fun. My favorite part is probably the music. It isn't amazing, but as someone who knows almost nothing about making music, I think I did a pretty great job. The biggest issue for this one is that it only has one level, and you can complete it in under a minute. So it seems pretty doom and gloom so far as my game dev career goes. A Blast Backwards is probably the most fun and complete out of all of these, and it's a mess. Luckily, I made one more game back in 2020 using Godot 3. This one is a short platformer called Made of Light. Made of Light is currently a comic project, but when I first came up with it, I wanted it to be a Metroidvania. The game only has one level, lasting about 5 minutes in total, but in that level it has 3 distinct enemies, a flying bat that fires acid, a beetle dog that can only be hurt from behind, and 2-legged frogs that hop on you. There are spikes, an end goal, and even locked doors. It's got some issues, but it works for the most part. It's much better than like those basic games, but it looks kinda bad. The environment has one texture and all of the animations are either bad or missing entirely. Of course, I think it looked better than the previous games, but I probably could have done a lot better. My only real excuse was that since all of these were made as class projects, I had pretty limited time to finish them. After that, I stopped making games for a long time. Wait. It wasn't that I lost interest, more so that I was just focusing on becoming a better writer and artist. Hey, I'm trying to talk here. Be quiet. Plus, since I graduated high school, I had to do this thing called paying rent. Like with money and stuff? Ugh, it's disgusting. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. The point is, I didn't have the time or energy to spend on game development. Luckily, all that changed when I got bored and decided to drop all of my other projects in favor of making this one. Not permanently, though. A while ago, I came up with a concept for a post-apocalyptic game where you play as an android scavenging in the ruins of civilization. I kind of imagine that Nier is like that, but I haven't played it myself. Over time, it became more fantasy sci-fi rather than just sci-fi. I made some characters and worked on the world building a little, but that was it. I still don't have a proper title for it, so I just call it Doll World. After messing around with pixel art for funsies, I spontaneously decided I would make as much of a game for it in a month as I could, and then just resume my other projects after. So, I downloaded Godot 4 and sat down to get to work. Unfortunately, the gap between this game and the previous one was like 4 years, so I couldn't remember how most of this worked. Not only that, but some of the things I did remember changed between 3 and 4. I remembered the broad ideas, but I struggled with some more specific things, like the GDScript syntax, for instance. Luckily, Godot has a lot of documentation and tutorials, so I spent the first 2 days setting up the project and giving the player character animations. The hardest part here was actually the pixel art. The thing is, Godot has a tendency to warp pixels slightly. I spent almost the entirety of day 2 trying to get rid of the warping. After crying deep and mournful tears, I got to work with the first enemy using a rat sprite I cooked up prior. By day 4, they were capable of wandering idle, as well as chasing the player. By day 6, they could attack the player, and you could attack them as well. At this point, I was feeling pretty damn confident. Like, yeah, I made a pest control simulator. What of it? At that pace, I was pretty certain I could get something sizable done, so naturally it didn't last. The next 7 days were spent suffering in hell. It turns out that making a usable tile set isn't that easy, but it was around this time that I found Heartbeast's action RPG tutorial series. Out of all of the tutorials I used, I think that he deserves special mention because that is quite literally exactly what I was trying to make. With his power, I was able to figure out what tiles I needed according to this rad chart. However, this didn't really help with the wall tiles, because I couldn't figure out how them being 2 tiles tall would affect things. I spent the better part of 3 days on the walls alone, struggling to figure out how they should look and what I needed. I also spent some time adding a health bar and particle effects. Technically, time might have been better spent making a more complete experience, but I was sick of my games looking like ass. It didn't have to be perfect, I don't think I'm capable of that, but it had to be a noticeably large improvement. There's a lot of things I would change about this, and of course I'll take gentle feedback, but it already looked mounds better than my past projects. Another issue I had was that I simply wasn't happy with the rat AI. As the game design god of an award-winning vermin-slashing simulator, I take rat AI deadly seriously. So naturally, I decided to redo the rats to make their AI more modular and to give them pathfinding. The next few days were spent experimenting with pathfinding and rewriting the rat code. Now, I was starting to realize a bit of a mistake. I was over halfway through my allotted time, and all I had was a small test environment, 1 move, and 1 enemy. Also, I had a pre-made tree sprite, so I threw that in too. At this point, I was starting to realize I wouldn't have anything even near a completed experience by the time the month was up. Yet another game doomed by the fact that it was so short, you could see all of the content in about 5 seconds. So naturally, I spent some time adding in sound effects and music. It isn't exactly content, but it helps the game feel immensely. In the past, I always used an 8-bit sound generator for all of my sound effects, but this time I made most of them by recording my mouth and occasionally objects lying around the room and processing them in Audacity. My favorite though are the rat noises, not because of the final product per se, but because of how they sounded when I first recorded them. Listen to this. Absolutely horrific. I also gave the enemies health bars, and I wrote my first 2 shaders ever. I still don't fully understand shaders, but the trees sway in the wind and you can see enemies behind walls. All in all, days 14 through 20 were spent on improving what I already had in the game. Now it was time to add more actual content. Next, I quite literally thought to myself, what would be the easiest enemy I could add right now? Well, I decided a wisp would work since they'd be easy to animate. I mean, they're literally just balls, angry balls. And since the rats were fast melee enemies, these ones would be slow, ranged enemies. It only took 3 days to implement these guys from start to finish from special effects, AI, and animations. Their aiming isn't perfect, admittedly, but they can hit often enough to be a threat, especially when there's a large group of enemies. They also have my favorite sound effects in-game, this time because of the end result. At this point I could have kept adding enemies or maybe worked on fleshing out a full level, but the player was really bothering me. All you had was a single swipe, no other abilities. Dodging was a pain since you could only walk away, the walk animation was kinda crappy, and all in all it just didn't feel very good to me. So for the next 6 days I redid the walk animations, made attack combos, and added a dash animation. After that, it was just a matter of adding the animations in. The hardest was easily the attack combos. No matter what I did, they seemed to be plagued by bugs and bad feelings. Still, I managed it eventually. The dash was much easier, which surprised me. Once both were in, though, I spent some time tweaking things and fixing bugs to make it feel as good as possible. By the end, I had a fairly cohesive, if a little stiff, combat system. In fact, it was actually fun. It was fun. Like, actually fun, absolutely insane. I didn't even know I could do that. Given it's basically a clone of Hyperlight Drifter, but with less polish, I'm still super proud of it. After adding in 2 enemies, sprucing up the game, and completing a simple but fun combat system, I only had 2 days left to have a full game. Yeah, not happening. So I gave up on having anything even vaguely complete, but I still had 2 days, so I spent them tweaking more things and making more props to place around the map. We've got fences, 2 sets of pipes, a radiator, some shrooms, some doors. We got it all. Frankly, I'd pay millions to live in such a lovely estate. Well, not quite as amazing as I had hoped, but that's just how it goes. Let's look at a short playthrough of what I did manage while I talk over it. All in all, you can kill all of the enemies on the map in under 2 minutes. Much like the others, it doesn't really have enough to hold your attention for more than a moment. Okay, but there's not really much reason to be disappointed with this. I was a beginner game dev to begin with, and I came back after a nearly 4-year break. I spent half the time at the beginning relearning things, and the other half learning completely new things. My animation skills have improved immensely, even just from this one project. It's probably the best game I've ever made in terms of sound, art, gameplay, and AI. Not only that, but I'm at least 60% sure the code holds up well enough for a larger project if I wanted to pursue that. Moreover, I just had a lot of fun. The game might not be a success compared to experienced game devs participating in jams and such, but by my standards, it was a huge success that shows just how much I've grown since I graduated. All in all, I feel good. Now, I might continue this project in the future, but I think I'm tucking this into its cozy bed situated firmly on the shelf. After all, I have made of Light, Swan Song, and BNC to work on. Maybe one day I'll become a rich, immortal, sexy vampire stud, but for now I only have a limited amount of time in my life. Of course, if and when I do continue to work on this, I'll be sure to post about it right here. For now, it's back to the world building and writing dungeon. Subscribe. It'll probably take a hot second, but I'm going to make another BNC video next. I might even make videos about my other projects too.